Our other headline, shoring up relations. China's vice president meets Portuguese leaders on a visit to strengthen ties between the two countries. A desperate search for survivors after a tourist boat capsizes in India, killing at least 22 people. He's a key player, the world-famous pianist. Lang Lang tells us how it felt to take centre stage at the King's coronation concert. Russia has launched one of its biggest waves of strikes on Ukraine since the invasion began. Missiles, rockets and airstrikes hit several cities overnight, including the capital, Kyiv. In Odessa, a fire ripped through this warehouse after it was hit by a cruise missile. Russia is stepping up its assaults as Moscow prepares to celebrate Victory Day on Tuesday. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent, Shelby Wilder, in Lviv. Shelby, Russia launching this wave of overnight attacks. What's the latest you're hearing on the ground?
Well, as you mentioned, Jamie, this was one of the largest widespread attacks on Ukraine carried out by Russia since this conflict began. We heard Ukraine's military say that in the early hours of Monday morning, they shot down 36 Iranian-made Shahed drones. We also know that Russia launched 16 missiles in addition to shelling and airstrikes that took place on numerous Ukrainian cities, including Kyiv, Kharkiv, Odessa, and Kherson, among others. Now, we just heard the numbers that 4 people have been killed. Numerous other people are wounded. We will keep you posted on that figure. Otherwise, we heard from Kyiv's mayor, Mr. Vitaly Klitschko, say that 5 civilians in the nation's capital have been injured after debris from an intercepted drone hit a residential apartment complex, and other debris from these drones was also scattered across the city. Klitschko said that almost 60 Shahed drones have been fired at Ukraine overnight. We're awaiting official confirmation from Ukraine's military on that figure. Otherwise, we know that Odessa in the south of Ukraine, 8 cruise missiles were launched by Russia on that city. We know that a food warehouse was hit, also a warehouse filled with humanitarian aid belonging to the Red Cross, and a recreational area, all engulfed in flames. And air raid sirens have been activated this afternoon across all of Ukraine, as Ukrainian officials have said that there is an increased risk of attack over the next 24 hours here on the ground, Jamie.
Shelby, obviously hours to Victory Day commemorations, the Victory Day parade in Moscow. The timing is significant.
Absolutely. So, as you mentioned, tomorrow, May 9th, marks Victory Day, which Russia celebrates in regards to Soviet Union beating Nazi Germany in 1945. Now, this is why we believe that there's this increase of attacks happening, because Russia would like to have a sort of symbolic victory to mark the calendars. Otherwise, this also follows the news last week we heard from the Kremlin, stating that they believe Ukraine was responsible for an alleged assassination attempt on Russian President Vladimir Putin with a drone strike at the Kremlin. Ukraine has vehemently denied any involvement in that, but it's a combination of factors, including Ukraine is about to launch its highly anticipated spring counteroffensive, in regards to why Ukrainian officials are saying they are seeing this increase in attacks, and they're warning civilians across Ukraine to not ignore the air raid sirens. And again, they are expecting that we will have more here in the following day. We will keep you posted on how this develops, Jamie.
Shelby, thank you for that. Our correspondent, Shelby Wilder, in Lviv. Well, as Shelby mentioned there, the attacks on Ukraine come as Moscow is preparing for Victory Day commemorations, the annual holiday marking Russia's victory over Nazi Germany in the Second World War. Let's talk now to our correspondent, Stuart Smith, in Moscow. Stuart, several regions in Russia reported as scrapping Victory Day parades this year. What more do we know about that?
Yeah, well, you could imagine places like the annexed Crimea would be cancelling these because of the massive threat, the massive opportunity, as some Russian officials are warning, for some very fantastic propaganda move by Ukraine to potentially attack one of these parades, which means so much to Russians and represent so much of military success for Moscow. Now in Crimea, they've cancelled them, sure, but also thousands of kilometres away from the front line of Ukraine, events have also been cancelled in over 20 cities in total in Russia. Now, the official explanation given by officials where these events have been cancelled is there are security concerns. They haven't specified what those are, but a week after a drone hit the Kremlin in Moscow, according to Russian officials, you can tell that the threat of terrorism is a concern amongst officials. But also one other explanation has been offered by analysts watching here in Russia, which is quite simply that in many of these regions there are not enough military personnel to put on a Victory Day parade as seen in years past, and rather than having to try and find cadets and perhaps retired military personnel to attend, much better instead to cancel the proceedings altogether. One thing that is going ahead is the main Moscow Victory Day parade. That could not be cancelled, and security indeed is tight. But what is not going ahead in Moscow, as it has done for the past 10 years, is the Immortal Regiment March, when citizens of Russia, residents of the city, would traditionally walk down the streets holding photographs of their ancestors who fought in World War II, the Great Patriotic War. That will not go ahead. Again, the Kremlin saying security concerns, but also others pointing to the fact there would be a big opportunity for those upset with the so-called special military operation to have their voice heard on a very important day.
Parade aside, in terms of the military campaign on the ground, Russia's Wagner Group says Moscow has promised more ammunition for the assault in Bakhmut. Just how significant is that?
Well, the repercussion if Moscow had not promised that ammunition, according to Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner private military company, was he was going to leave Bakhmut, the city that Russia has been fighting for months, and said it was nearly close to taking. He would have left, and his troops would have left that city, leaving it up to Ukrainian forces to simply retake. The Ministry of Defense has promised the ammunition that he said was necessary, as well as other equipment, and therefore he says his forces will remain after midnight on May 10th, which was the deadline he said he needed that ammunition by. Because of that, he says that his forces are going to push on. Another offensive is planned, and with that he has all the resources he needs. So over the next week we'll see if the ammunition that's been provided, that Yevgeny Prigozhin demanded, is enough to achieve that goal.
Stuart, thank you for that. Our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow. China says the EU has no right to interfere in its trade relationship with Russia. This all comes in response to reports that the European Union has proposed sanctions against 7 Chinese companies for allegedly selling equipment that can be used to help Russia attack Ukraine. China says that if these sanctions do come into force, the country will take action to safeguard its interests. Rescuers are continuing to look for survivors after an overcrowded tourist boat capsized, killing at least 22 people near the Indian town of Tanur. Police say it's unknown exactly how many passengers were on board when the converted fishing boat capsized. Its owner is believed to have survived. 8 people have been killed and at least 10 others injured when a car drove into a crowd in Texas. The victims were waiting at a bus stop outside a migrant shelter. The male driver of the SUV has been charged with reckless driving and could face additional charges. Investigators have not yet determined whether this crash was intentional. China's foreign ministry has called on the United States ambassador to China to help get relations between the two countries back on track. Qin Gang made his comments during a meeting with Ambassador Nicholas Burns in Beijing. Qin said that the China-US relationship was important, not just for the two sides, but for the whole world. He urged the ambassador to become a bridge between the two countries. Burns said he agreed on the need to bring stability to the relationship. And Chinese Vice President Han Zheng is in Portugal to strengthen bilateral ties. Han has met Portuguese Prime Minister Antonio Costa and President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa. The two sides are expected to discuss trade as well as the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Well, our correspondent Ken Brown is watching events for us in Lisbon. Ken, so what's on the agenda altogether?
Yes, Jamie, as you say, Vice President Han Zheng is here in Lisbon after attending the coronation ceremony for King Charles III. This morning he met with Prime Minister Antonio Costa before heading straight to the presidential palace behind me here to meet with Portuguese President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa. Now, on the agenda are the shared interests in deepening of bilateral ties, strengthening trade between the two countries, and the Ukraine war. Now, of course, Portugal, as a NATO country, is aligned with the other members and the countries of the European Union, but they say that they are, of course, open to dialogue with anyone who can help to bring about peace in this conflict. Tomorrow, the Vice President Han will travel to Porto, Portugal's second biggest city, before he heads to the Netherlands, taking advantage of his time here in Europe.
Ken, thank you for that. Our correspondent Ken Brown in Lisbon. A ceasefire between Sudan's warring sides appears to be holding in Khartoum. The skies over the Sudanese capital were quiet after talks to firm up the rather shaky truce began in Saudi Arabia. The United Nations top humanitarian official is trying to facilitate negotiations between the warring factions. Martin Griffiths is calling for security guarantees to protect aid deliveries. Well, Jeremiah Nyman Mamabolo is South Africa's High Commissioner to the UK. He told CGTN what's happening in Sudan is unacceptable and is calling on African countries to take the lead in negotiating peace.
Really disappointed with what has happened there. We were looking at what we thought is a perfect solution to this, because you had these generals who are fighting now. They were part of a transition arrangement with the civilians. And of course they played a role in a sense that they just removed from power Bashir and the Islamists. And obviously if you didn't have the military that was accompanying the people's power, if you like, the people would have been removed. And so you needed this transition in which some people would break away from the army and be with the people in earnest. And so we thought that would be the model of transition towards a better solution, a Sudan that is just, that is looking and taking care of the concerns of the people on the ground. The people's power means you must have a new constitution, have new elections, and have a president and a candidate that is being supported of the people and begin to address the concerns of the people in earnest. So what is happening in Sudan is a disaster. It can only end up in destroying Sudan. The sooner the international community, we were very encouraged that IGAD, the regional body that is involved in trying to resolve that conflict. The AU must back them up. The African countries, I believe, should take a lead. The United Nations must play its role. Everybody must play their role. And the international community must put pressure. This needs to end. The people of Sudan have suffered a great deal under Bashir, and to continue to suffer like this, it's just unacceptable.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Back on Earth, China's reusable spacecraft touches down after 276 days in orbit.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Just
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Air raid sirens sound across Ukraine after Russia launches a wave of drone and missile strikes as Moscow's military prepares to mark Victory Day. Our other headline, shoring up diplomatic relations. China's vice president meets Portuguese leaders on a visit to strengthen ties between the two countries. More than 400 people are now known to have died after flooding and landslides hit the Democratic Republic of Congo last week. Several villages were submerged, while hundreds of homes near Lake Kivu were washed away after heavy rain triggered landslides. Survivors are digging through the mud to try and find loved ones in what is one of the country's deadliest natural disasters in recent history. More than 10,000 people have been forced to leave their homes due to heavy rain and flooding in China. Central Jiangxi province is one of the worst affected areas. Forecasters have warned of further heavy rain, storms and high winds, with Fujian and Guangdong province also expected to be hit. Meanwhile, in Australia, winter weather has come early this year. Heavy snowfall blanketed Namadgi National Park, and snow and hail has hit New South Wales. High winds created large surf swells on Bondi Beach. The cold front has brought temperatures well below the average for May. NASA has successfully launched the first of its new cyclone monitoring satellites after previous launch attempts were abandoned due to bad weather. The rocket carrying the satellites took off from New Zealand and will eventually be joined by 3 more satellites, which will measure and track tropical cyclones and hurricanes. And an experimental Chinese spacecraft has returned to Earth after 276 days in orbit, completing a landmark mission to test the country's reusable space technologies. The unmanned spacecraft returned to northwest China on Monday on schedule. Well, let's talk to Xu Yangsong, Director General of the Asia-Pacific Space Cooperation Organization. Xu Yangsong, welcome to the program. This is China's second test flight of a reusable spacecraft. What do we know about this so far?
Well, I think reusable spacecraft is not a new thing, because we have seen that the Soviet Union as well as the U.S. have used this manned or unmanned spacecraft many times. We know the space shuttle, and we know the Cyclone of Russia, and also we know the X-34, which is also a reusable top stage of the launch vehicle. So reusable that comes back to Earth like an airplane is nothing new.
I mean, lowering the cost is key for all of these future space missions, isn't it? We've seen, as you suggested, Elon Musk testing the Starship. Europe is preparing its Ariane 6 rocket for a test flight. In this space race, where is China when it comes to reusable spacecraft technology?
Well, these are 2 different categories of reusable vehicles. The former one is a recoverable capsule, or the top stage. And the second segment, as we call it, the reusable launch vehicle, like Elon Musk in SpaceX has been using the Falcon heavy lifting and also Falcon series of launch vehicle to recover the first and second stage. And of course, this is also something we're exploring as Chinese team are teaming up, in particular the commercial sector. The Deep Blue and many other companies are using technologies to recover the first and second stage of the launch vehicle. Of course, that will radically reduce the price from 100% to 30% of the launching cost. As you mentioned, also the Ariane 6 is also a low-cost launch vehicle, and China is using also commercial sector as well as the what we call it the national team, which is the Long March 8, is also adopting this technology of reusable launch vehicle.
Good to talk to you. Thanks so much for coming on the program. That's Xu Yangsong, Director General of the Asia-Pacific Space Cooperation Organization. Now, back on Earth, King Charles's coronation is expected to bring a $1.3 billion boost to the UK economy in terms of consumer spending and tourism. But many businesses think that figure could have been even higher had the UK not axed tax-free shopping for tourists when it left the European Union. CGTN's Siobhan McCall reports.
London is home to some of the most famous shopping streets in the world. It's long been a haven for tourists to stock up on luxury brands. But after Brexit, Britain became the only country in Europe not to offer tax-free shopping to international visitors. And that has caused anger in the retail sector.
I think it's a great mistake because it's made the attractiveness of coming to the UK as a destination, both for European travellers doing short-haul trips, but also longer-haul trips, it's made it that bit less.
Oxford Economics says that the perk would offer a $5 billion boost to the country and sustain 80,000 jobs. But the UK government says that scrapping tax-free shopping saves the country $2.5 billion a year.
They didn't look at all of the benefits that they would get from tourists spending in hotels, in restaurants, in cultural activities. But critically also, they didn't think that tourists would change where they went if we got rid of VAT-free shopping.
The tourists we spoke to in London's Knightsbridge said the removal of tax-free shopping would make them reconsider big purchases in the UK.
It's very bad for tourists to have to pay more money for the gifts and other things.
Because the pound compared to Swedish krona is not so good, so I say okay, it doesn't matter. But it would be nice to have a tax-free too.
Tourists from Gulf countries spent 35% less in the UK last year than in 2019. But in comparison, they spent 50% more in France and 2/3 more in Italy.
And it's not hard to see why. A bag like this, bought at a luxury department store in London, like Harrods behind me, costs around $1,800. But if international visitors were to hop onto the Eurostar and head to Paris, the purchase there would cost around $1,400, largely due to the EU's VAT refund.
Harrods is one of more than 150 businesses to sign an open letter demanding a rethink from the government. But the government says it will not be changing its so-called tourist tax policy. But after the King's coronation attracted visitors from all around the globe, many retail businesses may be left thinking, in terms of profits, what could have been. Siobhan McCall, CGTN, London.
Well, it's the final day of the coronation long weekend, and people right across the UK are marking the occasion by taking part in volunteer projects such as cleaning beaches, picking up litter and planting trees and wildflowers. It follows a star-studded King's Coronation concert. Katy Perry, Take That and Lionel Richie among the performers at Windsor Castle. The Chinese pianist Lang Lang also took centre stage, performing Reflection from Disney's movie Mulan. In an exclusive interview with CGTN, the world-famous pianist shared his experience of playing before a global audience.
Actually, I had a privilege to play for the Queen's Diamond Jubilee in 2012 in the Buckingham Palace. And then I played for King Charles many times before.
So you've met him many times before. Yes. Is he a genuine music fan?
He's a big classical music fan. I'm sure he likes other music as well, but classical music, he actually plays several different instruments. And look at yesterday's coronation ceremony. I mean, that was a feast of classical music.
You're performing with Nicole Scherzinger. How did this come about?
I met Nicole a few times in a different occasion, and so this time when the station proposed the Mulan's Reflection, and so we were looking into the collaborator, and so Nicole actually really liked this idea a lot, and she actually never sang this song before, but she found this is a great collaboration and also a great melody. I must say this is a great choice for this concert because this song is so lyrical, beautiful, and also has a kind of a fusion kind of a connection between the East and the Western culture.
As well as performing, you also have a foundation now. What is that about?
My foundation is based in China, US, and Europe, and now we have more than 200 schools which we sponsor and we support. So we have thousands of kids taking a music class as part of the curriculum, not after school program, but in the school program. And it's very interesting, in the West, we call it keys of inspiration, because very often people here, especially the younger generation, felt classical music can be boring. So that's why the music, the classical inspiration, right? And in China, we call simply happy keyboard, because many of the kids there felt practicing is too hard, it's not happy. So that's why we want to change the idea of making music. Making music is always great, but sometimes the progress, it's hard.
You've been giving hundreds of keyboards to schools here and China and elsewhere.
We're giving a lot of keyboard everywhere in our schools. In China, we have 100 schools, and each school is receiving about 25 keyboards. And same situation in the West as well. So the idea is to bring instruments integrated into the schools and the music class, and then every kid have the chance to not just sitting there listening, but to sitting there and playing, and to compose and to sing with it, and to make friends with the digital smart pianos.
The headlines again. Air raid sirens sound across Ukraine after Russia launches a wave of drone and missile strikes as Moscow prepares to mark Victory Day. Our other headlines: shoring up diplomatic relations. China's vice president meets Portuguese leaders on a visit to strengthen ties between the two countries. And a desperate search for survivors after a tourist boat capsizes in India, killing at least 22 passengers. And that is The World Today. Thank you for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel, on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
In today's World Insight, COVID-19, no longer an international public health emergency, the WHO announced. What does it mean for people still vulnerable to coronavirus infections and looking onward